Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're diving into one of the absolute biggest financial mysteries of our modern world. I mean, we hear about it in the news literally all the time, right? Governments blowing billions, national deficits skyrocketing, economies that look like they're just completely drowning in obligations. But to actually understand the global economy, we have to look past the panic headlines and decode how the system itself really works.
Picture this. Imagine waking up tomorrow, walking to your mailbox and opening a letter claiming you suddenly owe 50 grand, money that you never borrowed and you never even spent. Sounds totally insane and unfair, right? Well, that is exactly the situation almost every citizen on Earth is in right now. Because whether you live in the UK, India, Germany, or the US, your government is carrying a massive amount of debt, essentially on your behalf.
All right, let's look at this absolutely massive number. $36 trillion. That is the current national debt of the United States alone. And yep, it's still counting. And they aren't even the only ones. Japan owes more than twice the size of its entire economy. Even the wealthiest, most incredibly stable nations on the planet are carrying debts that are honestly just too large for the human brain to fully comprehend.
And this brings us to a really brilliant question, our central mystery for today. If nearly every country on the planet is borrowing billions or trillions of dollars, who exactly is sitting on all this cash to lend them? Like, is there a secret group of billionaires? Some hidden megabank? And hey, if governments have the power to just print their own money, why are they bothering to borrow it at all?
Section 1. Why do countries borrow? Well, before we unmask our mystery lender, we have to sketch out exactly why governments need to take on all this money in the first place.
Now you're probably thinking, why don't they just print the cash to pay for everything? It sounds like the perfect cheat code, right? No interest, no loans. But history has shown us time and time again that unchecked money printing leads straight to hyperinflation. When countries like Zimbabwe or Venezuela tried this, their currencies completely collapsed, rendering the money basically worthless. Borrowing, on the other hand, actually enforces economic discipline simply because debt comes with interest that has to be accounted for and repaid.
So, the crucial takeaway here is that borrowing is a deliberate, highly strategic tool used for these 5 main reasons. Governments borrow to cover the gap when they spend more on public services than they actually collect in taxes. They borrow to build critical things like roads and schools today rather than waiting decades to save up the cash. They also use it to survive sudden, massive emergencies, famously allowing the U.S. to inject $3.8 trillion into the economy during the COVID-19 crisis just to keep businesses afloat. And they even borrow to pay off older debts, or as a lever to control inflation across the broader economy.
Section 2. How government bonds work. Let's move to the mechanics now and see how this actually builds into a functioning global system. Obviously, governments don't just walk into a local bank and ask for a $1 trillion mortgage. Instead, they sell these promises, known as government bonds, in the world's biggest financial marketplace. Think of it like an IOU. When you buy a bond, you hand your cash over to the government. In exchange, they give you a contract promising to pay you back that initial amount at a later date, plus a really steady stream of interest along the way.
If you picture the global economy as one enormous, interconnected network, these 3 simple steps just repeat endlessly. The government spots a funding gap, it issues these bonds out into the global marketplace, and then it honors those contracts by repaying the interest over time. This cycle acts as the absolute engine for national growth, funding literally everything from the military to medical research.
Okay, so we've established exactly how they borrow, but we still need to solve our central mystery and unmask the actual lenders. If $36 trillion didn't just pop out of a single megabank, whose money is it?
Section 3. Who really owns the debt? Let's start mapping out this massive web so we can see exactly where the cash is flowing.
All right, here is the ultimate reveal. There is no secret billionaire lender calling the shots. The debt is actually owned by you. It's owned by ordinary citizens, your pension funds, commercial banks, and insurance companies that just need a super safe place to store cash. It's also owned by foreign nations like China and Japan, who take the dollars they earn from global trade and invest them right back into U.S. bonds to earn that interest.
But here's a massive plot twist for you. Governments actually owe a huge chunk of money to themselves. It's called intragovernmental debt. For instance, in the U.S., agencies like Social Security take their extra cash reserves and buy U.S. Treasury bonds to earn interest, which provides more benefits for retirees down the line. Get this, about 20% of the U.S. national debt, which is over $7.3 trillion, is just the government borrowing from its own internal accounts.
So, what about weaker economies that standard investors just won't touch?
Well, when a country is completely flat broke and foreign investors walk away, they have to turn to international lenders of last resort. The World Bank might step in to fund specific long-term infrastructure projects. But if a nation is facing a total financial meltdown, they go to the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. The catch? IMF emergency loans come with incredibly strict conditions. They often require a country to painfully raise taxes and slash public spending just to get their house in order.
Which brings us to Section 4, the invisible force, trust. When you look at this incredibly complex web of lending, you kind of have to ask, what is the invisible glue keeping this massive interconnected debt machine from just falling apart?
Honestly, it all boils down to trust. Sovereign credibility is absolutely everything here. An investor is only going to buy a 10-year bond if they truly believe that government will still exist and pay them back in 10 years. And what gives governments this unique superpower? Taxes. A government's unique legal power to collect consistent tax revenue from its citizens and businesses makes their bonds incredibly safe. But, and this is a big but, that's only true as long as people believe the economy is healthy enough to actually generate those taxes.
The global bond market is super clear about this. It actively rewards trust with lower borrowing costs. If your country is politically stable and growing, investors flock to your bonds and you can borrow at incredibly low interest rates. But man, the market violently punishes uncertainty. If investors think a country might mismanage its funds, they demand super high interest rates to compensate for the risk. That makes borrowing extremely expensive and can quickly trap a country in totally unmanageable debt.
Section 5, when the system breaks. Because yeah, what happens when a government mismanages its economy and that crucial trust simply evaporates? When a regular business runs out of money, it goes bankrupt, right? Its assets get auctioned off, but you can't exactly auction off a country. A country still has citizens, borders, laws, so instead it suffers what's called a sovereign default. Basically, the government just stands up and announces it cannot or will not make its required debt payments.
Let's trace the timeline of how this catastrophe actually plays out. It usually kicks off with persistent, large deficits paired with zero real economic growth. As the years drag on, investors notice the cracks, they lose trust, and they demand higher interest rates. Eventually, the country enters the dreaded debt snowball, where they are literally forced to borrow new money just to pay the crushing interest on their old loans. The math becomes impossible, and the whole system collapses into default.
And look, this isn't just some whiteboard financial theory. It has very real, devastating human consequences. We've seen this exact sequence devastate the citizens of Greece, who had to endure brutal austerity measures and sky-high unemployment after their massive crisis. Argentina has faced decades of recurring instability because their credibility was so damaged. And in 2022, Sri Lanka defaulted on $51 billion. That led to a massive loss of foreign currency, causing severe daily shortages of basic food, medicine, and fuel for its people.
So, after seeing disasters like that, you might be thinking the obvious solution is just zero debt. Like, can a country actually be 100% debt-free? Technically, yes. Macau manages it, but Macau is a tiny region that happens to rake in billions from casinos. For massive modern nations, completely eliminating debt is not only nearly impossible without devastating tax hikes, but it would actually wipe out the ultra-safe government bonds that secure the world's commercial banks and, you guessed it, our global retirement pension funds.
When we step back and look at the global system we've outlined today, we can see that debt isn't inherently a hero or a villain. It's merely a tool. Kind of like electricity. If you use it carelessly, it can absolutely burn your house down. But if you use it to build roads, fund education, and stabilize during emergencies, it literally powers human progress. The true wealth of a nation is really measured by how responsibly it manages this powerful tool.
So, I'll leave you with this final thought to ponder. Knowing now that you, your pension, and your local bank are essentially the ultimate lenders in this giant web, do you want your government to aggressively stop borrowing to lower the risk of collapse? Or is that very debt the essential engine building the infrastructure of your future? Thank you for joining me on this explainer, and as always, keep questioning the systems around you.